I'm James Ward, and I like boring things. I like boring things so much that as Julian said, I am the founder of the Boring Conference. It's a day sort of dedicated to the mundane, the ordinary, the obvious, and the overlooked. And boring kind of came about by accident, really. What happened is there's a guy called Russell Davis who does a thing called interesting. And interesting, it's interesting as sort of one-day conference of different people talking about interesting stuff. But sadly, in August 2010, Russell tweeted that he was going to have to cancel the conference that year because he was too busy with work or whatever. He didn't have time to organize it. So I write a blog called I Like Boring Things. Interesting had been cancelled. It seemed like the obvious thing to do would be to do a boring conference. And I kind of tweeted about it. I didn't really give it much thought. You can see how much thought I put into it by the fact that I missed the word is from between this and my. I didn't realize it was going to be a historic tweet that I'd be standing in front of a room of people all staring at it, looking at my poor grammar. I just tweeted it. And the thing is, this is like one of the dangers of Twitter, one of the dangers of the internet, is in the olden days, what would happen is you'd go to the pub and you'd sit there and you'd have a drink. And, you know, basically you'd just be talking to your friends and you'd say something like, oh, interesting's been cancelled, might do a boring conference, that'll be funny. And that would be the end of it. But with Twitter, you're not just saying it to the people sort of sitting at your table. You're not even just saying it to the people in the pub. You're saying it to the whole of the internet. And this is why you should never, ever joke on Twitter. Don't ever pretend, don't ever say that you're going to do something just as a joke, because what will happen is people will respond, and you're going to have to do it. You're going to be stuck in a situation of your own creation. And so I wrote it on a Post-it note. I picked it. I tweeted about it. And something weird happened, which was it sold out really quickly. It was in the Independent, and it turned out that people wanted to be bored. They were willing to pay money to see something boring. And so we had, this is Ed Ross. He did a taste test of different types of milk and matching them with appropriate cereals. We had Lewis Dryborough, who talked about his favorite car park roofs, the roofs of multi-story car parks where he eats his lunch, and Peter Fletcher, who counts his sneezes. Every time Peter sneezes, he writes it down in a little notebook, the time, the date, where he was, what he was doing, and a measure of strength between mild, moderate to strong, strong, and very strong. I think very strong has only ever been used once or twice. And people seem to enjoy it. And they enjoyed it so much that I had to do another one last year. People queued up outside, and Sky News came to cover it. This is Tim Steiner. Tim Steiner loves electric hand dryers so much that he's got a Dyson Airblade installed in his house. That's my mum. My mum was on telly. I wasn't on telly. They were meant to interview me later in the day, and Saif Gaddafi got arrested, and apparently that was considered more newsworthy. Those bloody Gaddafis, that family. I'll never forgive them. And The Sun came and reported it, and they seemed to like it as well. So it's like this weird thing of, why would people be interested in boring things? Why do I like boring things? Well, the phrase, I like boring things, the title of this talk, the title of my blog, comes from Andy Warhol. And in Popism, Warhol says that he does like boring things, but the things that he finds boring are not the same as the things that other people find boring. For instance, he says that he doesn't like watching sort of popular TV programs of the time because they sort of recycle the same plots and the same themes. And he says, apparently, most people love watching the same basic thing as long as the details are different. If I'm going to sit and watch the same thing I saw the night before, I don't want it to be essentially the same. I want it to be exactly the same. Because the more you look at the exact same thing, the more the meaning goes away, and the better and emptier you feel. I don't really agree with Warhol there. I kind of feel the opposite, because I think that the more you look at the exact same thing, the richer in meaning it becomes. In Stuart Lee's book, he quotes John Cage, who says, if something is boring for 2 minutes, try it for 4. If still boring, then 8. Then 16, then 32. Eventually, one discovers that it's not boring at all. And I think what he's talking about there is kind of the transformative power of attention, the way that it can take something which on the surface might appear dull, whether it's sneezing or car park roofs or milk, but it sort of, by paying attention to it, it unravels or sort of reveals a sort of a hidden beauty. There's a French writer, Georges Perec, who sort of talks a lot about this kind of idea. In Species of Spaces, he talks about the infra ordinary, which is the opposite of the extraordinary. And he says, how should we take account of, question, describe what happens every day and recurs every day? The banal, the quotidian, the obvious, the common, the ordinary, the infraordinary, the background noise, the habitual. What we need to question is bricks, concrete, glass, our table manners, our utensils, our tools, the way we spend our time, our rhythms, to question that which seems to have ceased forever to astonish us. And he comes up with various strategies and literary devices throughout his work, trying to deal with this idea. In an attempt at exhausting a place in Paris, he goes to a small square in the center of Paris, and in that square there's a cafe, and he goes to the cafe and he sits in a seat by the window and he describes everything that he can see in that square. And then the next day he goes back to the exact same seat, looking out through the same window, and again he describes everything that he can see. And on the third day he goes back and again describes everything that he could see from that window. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to find out what happens when nothing happens. And it's kind of impossible now to imagine nothing happening. We live in a world of 24-hour, not even just 24-hour news, 24-hour breaking news. There's always stuff happening. But actually, what happens when nothing happens is amazing stuff happens, if that doesn't even make sense. But there's a film by Charles and Ray Eames called Powers of 10. And in that, they show that when you focus in on a sort of specific point, then what originally seemed familiar and everyday, when you look at it closer and closer and closer and closer, it suddenly becomes extraordinary and alien and complex. But it takes time to reach that point, and of course we know it takes time because in our everyday lives, in our sort of experience of our personal lives, we know that it takes time when you're building a relationship or a friendship. It takes time to sort of get to that level. I mean, if we imagine that this was a party and you're talking to someone and you say, what is your name? I don't care. What's your name? I don't care. What's your name? I don't care. Then if you did that in real life, then people would think that you were a dick. But we somehow kind of accept that channel hopping mentality in our cultural lives. Just come dine with me, coach trip. I did that myself, that's good. We sort of accept this channel hopping mentality, but what if instead we reject the rapidity and rapacity of so much of what we're expected to want to consume in terms of culture, and instead we celebrated projects which are smaller and slower and less interesting. Someone scanning the entirety of the 1985 Argos catalogue, putting it on Flickr, or someone creating a Google map showing the locations used in the Hugh Grant film About a Boy. These are projects which have no intrinsic value other than the fact that someone took the time to do them. And I mentioned Peter earlier, who counts his sneezes. And what I love about Peter and this sneeze count project is that for the first sort of 6 months or something, he had to keep it quiet, he had to keep it private. Because if you're talking to someone and they sneeze, and then they take out a little notebook and write something down, and you say, what are you doing? And he says, oh, every time I sneeze, I write it down in a notebook. And he said, oh, really? How long have you been doing that? And he said, 3 days. You think, oh, that's rubbish. You're an idiot. Whereas if someone said, if you said, how long have you been doing that? And he said, 3 years. That suddenly sort of becomes quite impressive. And it's like he's created this amazing data set. And the fact that because he includes where he was and what he was doing, it becomes like a diary. It's like a micro diary. But rather than writing about the most significant thing that he does each day, he writes about the least significant thing. And it's more honest than a diary because he's not self-editing it. These are specific, objective, discrete events that he's describing. And so it reveals patterns which would otherwise have been hidden. this is Robert Opie, who runs the Museum of Brands and Packaging in Notting Hill. And it's an amazing museum. And it tells the story of the 20th century through crisp packets and Coke cans and boxes of cereal. And the whole thing it's basically his own private collection. He's built up this extraordinary collection, which is now fills a whole museum. And he started the collection when he was 16 with a single packet of munchies. And what I find amazing about that is, I mean, it sort of seems obvious now in retrospect, but packaging is such an ephemeral thing. It's the stuff that surrounds us every day, and nobody gives it any value. Nobody thinks of it as something that should be a museum. But this 16-year-old man, he's not 16 in that picture, obviously, he sort of had that vision, and he also must have had really understanding parents, because now his collection is amazing, but there must have been a long time when he was basically a 16-year-old boy in his bedroom surrounded by crisp packets. And his mum and dad didn't say to him, Robert, you should go outside and talk to girls, you know, this is not normal. They sort of went along with it, and it's, like he says, and the thousands of pieces of our social history are assembled into some giant jigsaw, the picture becomes clearer as to the remarkable journey we've all come through. And that started with a single packet of munchies. So I think what we should do is we should all go out and we should find our own munchies. And when you find those munchies, you should take them home, keep them safe, build up your collection, and then when you're ready, go out and tell the world that you like boring things too. And that's the end.